Welcome to Where Do We Go From Here? This is a new series of programs on Nevada County Television which seeks to examine difficult local issues from a variety of perspectives. In this program, we'll be interviewing or conversing with about a dozen or so people in and out of county government in various nonprofits who are quite experienced in particular problems that we're facing. The program today concerns homelessness in Nevada County, but by extension homelessness in America and around the world. Today I'm talking with Heidi Hall, who's the 1st District Supervisor and one of the few elected people we'll be talking with in this program. How do you see it as a person who ran for supervisor partly on the issue of homelessness? Now that you've been in office for a year and a half, have things changed? Well, first just tell me how you see the overall question.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for having me and having my perspective here. As you've probably heard in this series, homelessness is a large issue across the entire United States. It's particularly difficult in California as well because of the high cost of living and the housing crisis that we're in. So it's an issue all counties are having to deal with on one level or another. When I ran and made homelessness a particular issue for my campaign, my feeling was the county had to do more. That although it was difficult for the county to solve problems that need help from cities, from nonprofits, from the state, from the feds, everyone has a piece of this problem and therefore needs to provide a piece of the solution. And it seemed to me that the county could do more here in Nevada County. I was happy and excited and gratified to see that in my first month of supervisors, as a supervisor, the 5 of us meet within the first month to set our priorities for the coming year. And that first month, that first meeting, we all agreed, the supervisors agreed to make homelessness and low-income housing a high top priority. It had been a secondary priority the year before, which was already an improvement, but we got it bumped up to a top priority right away. So that was gratifying. That means that we can direct staff, county staff, to do whatever it takes that we agree on to address the housing and homelessness issue.
And the county already had a housing director, but now you have a housing resource manager?
We do. That was one of the results of making it a high priority, which was very exciting. We coordinate multiple grants. There are dozens of nonprofits that have a role to play in addressing homelessness. There are 3 cities in this county that all have a significant role. So having someone to coordinate those services, keep the big picture in mind, I saw as something critical for us to solve this problem.
And now that there are 2 people working on it, well, there's probably a dozen people working on it, 2 people really addressing the housing question, how do they divide that up?
Well, there's one person who's a homelessness and housing coordinator, so he's the key person. You're going to be interviewing him later. But we also have managed, we've done a number of things this year. So we've added 2 more people to help with Utah's Place to make sure that people are getting signed up for the services they need. We've instituted a new process to bring more nonprofits into the system so that we can move towards a 24/7 facility, which was one of my high priorities. We've added beds to the homeless to Hospitality House. We've added 16 beds through the Boast House. We've got a new house coming online in Penn Valley. So it's bits and pieces. This isn't a county like most rural counties that's going to build $1 million, 100-bed facility. It's just not going to happen. It's not possible. But what we are able to do is to increase beds throughout the county in different areas, and with existing providers who are already doing a good job, to try to add some staff or add some money or provide more wraparound services to address homelessness. So we've got beds, and now we're looking for a 24/7 facility. We're looking for a day sort of a navigation center where homeless folks, after they've had a place to sleep, they aren't put back out on the street. They have some place to go where they can continue to look for jobs or get additional services or work on their resume or build skills that they need to get back in the workforce if that's the problem. So we've made some significant strides. It's taken a year to get us there. We've made budget commitments. We've addressed a number of gaps in services that we found in terms of working across agencies, finding that people fall through the cracks. So we're trying to fill those gaps as well.
Now you say that the county has moved it up from somewhere down the list to second to first.
Right.
This seems to have happened with the public in general.
Yes.
That 10 years ago, it was an issue most people didn't think about. I think Hospitality House brought it to many people's attention.
Right.
Then there have been other things like the Stryker House and Sierra Roots, but
Right.
all of a sudden, in the last 3 or 4 months, I see one proposal after another that aren't necessarily coming from government or established organizations, but somebody says, well, I want to put a couple of tiny houses here, or I want to do tents here. How do those fit into the picture?
Well, there have been proposals out there and ideas out there for a long time. It's just a matter of getting traction, getting the right people in place and the right money. The hardest thing to do is to get a piece of land and build a facility or build homes for homelessness, for low-income folks. That is absolutely the hardest thing to do. And there have been a lot of people trying these quick solutions, tiny houses, tent cities. Many of those have been tried across the country. They're very hard to make happen. And in all cases, you still need a piece of land that someone can purchase. You need a developer who's willing to build. All of that costs money. And so trying to find people who can afford to do that with county help, with the city agreeing, because one of the issues is you really need services to have a house or houses. You need services, and all those services are in cities, especially in a rural county like ours. The cities aren't that excited necessarily to build more low-income housing or homelessness camps on their periphery. So it has to be a real partnership between the city, the county, and the nonprofits who are really on the hook for providing a lot of the sort of gap stop measures, as well as trying to find a developer or someone who's willing to do the building.
And you see it as your position as a supervisor to be sort of maybe the coordinator?
I think as an elected official, I have the opportunity to help drive the attention and the staff resources towards it. So I am the advocate on the board. I still have to make sure that the other supervisors have to agree to put money towards these issues. So there's been an education process as well for everyone. But we're not the only answer. We're not the answer. In fact, what the counties provide for the most part are services, and they're essential. Without the services, we'd have triple the amount of homeless people on the streets. So food aid, housing vouchers, job aid, medical aid, almost mental health assistance. We provide hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of services like that are really unseen and often unrecognized by the public. And we depend on the cities, because of the location, to find places to build and expand. And then we depend on nonprofits also to step in and fill some of
And
it.
you think it may be nonprofits that will provide the 24/7 sort of facility you're looking for?
We're looking to work with a set of nonprofits who are interested in doing that. So we provide funding wherever we can, and of course our funding has to come from the state grants, because it always has to be tied to a service, it has to be tied to a grant. And the grants have been notoriously difficult for rural areas to get. It's one of those ways that the state doesn't do a great job for rural areas, because we don't have that many votes, and the grants that are set up tend to skew towards urban areas. So there's an education process we're going to have to do with the state as well. But when we can, we provide funds to the nonprofits to do this work. Many of them also add their own, without our funding, they step in and do a lot of work. We would be lost without their assistance.
What's the short-term view and what's the long-term view? Do you think this is obviously not a problem that you can ever solve per se, because people become homeless for so many different reasons, and quite often financial difficulties. A family that could be rather prosperous one moment could have huge medical bills and then out on the street.
Right.
And there will always be mental health problems. There will always be addiction problems.
That's exactly right.
But is there, if you could imagine the ideal situation 10 years from now, what would it be?
Well, we would have the majority of homeless people housed. I mean, the biggest, there's only one solution. It's to put homeless people in housing and provide them the wraparound services so they can stay in housing, so they can become good tenants, so they can get jobs and maintain their own finances. That's the only solution there is. And the hardest part of that right now is the funding for services and the housing. So 10 years from now, if we had created enough housing, we had enough services, and our economy was doing well enough that we could, make sure that those folks could be employed, we could make a substantial dent in this problem.
And it's been said again and again in places that have tried putting homeless people in housing that it's by far the cheapest solution.
Of course, as well as the most humane.
Right.
There are people who choose not to live in a home, in a house, but by far the most people want to be in a home. They want the stability. We want them and their families to have the stability. It's just very difficult to sustain when you can't get along on one job, or you have children, or you have mental health issues that are hard to manage. So we have to provide those services to help them stay in the housing.
And as I mentioned, I think the public opinion is changing rapidly from essentially wanting to look away from the problem and pretend it didn't exist to suddenly realizing it's one of our top priorities.
I think there's always two sides of it. There's the humanity of it. People are realizing how inhumane it is for people to have to live on the streets, but there are also dangers. They pose dangers when they start fires or cause problems downtown. People want to see those problems get solved as well.
So to wrap it up, I assume you're hoping to be a supervisor for a number of years to come.
Well, I have 3 more years.
3 more years to go
in this term.
And is this still this you hope will be your top priority?
It will, yes. It continues to be one of my top priorities until we do as much as we possibly can.
Okay, just out of curiosity, what are the others?
We have cannabis regulations that we need to put in place to make sure that we get control of cannabis growing and we come into compliance with the state. I'd love to see our economic growth coincide with more trails and more attention to the Yuba River, and recognizing that we're a mecca for art and culture and the outdoors as well. Those are also
And there
priorities.
also is a extreme housing shortage, even for people who have the money to
That's right.
buy houses. I've observed several people this year who've put in an offer on a house and have been out. There have been 10 or 12 offers within 24 hours.
Yeah, it's an extreme problem, and California is one of the worst states right now for housing. That's going to be a really big problem to solve, and it's going to take more than a couple of years. But there are a number of people working on this issue, and we'll continue to work on that.
Yeah. In most of California, it's been because the population has been growing so fast. Or in certain areas like the Bay Area, I believe, the number of people moving in has greatly exceeded the number of new housing units.
Yeah.
In Nevada County, the population is not growing, but it seems that somehow the number of houses that are available is not adequate.
Well, it's housing stock. We are 10 years behind on housing stock throughout the state, rural and urban areas. So even without population growth, we have a problem. We don't have enough housing for people who've been here already 10 years looking for housing. And we are, we are going to become more and more attractive as the Bay Area, people get priced out of the Bay Area. They move farther away. And if we can sustain a good sort of work, telecommuting place to work, people love to come up here and telecommute. So if we have the housing, we can, the work is there.
And I just wonder, is there a danger that the people who've outbid 10 other people for one house that may reinforce the sort of NIMBY attitude that they want to, they've got theirs and forget about the other people. I don't think that's happening. It seems right now that we're becoming more generous as a county rather than less.
I think so. And also, the market will, as long as there are people with money wanting to buy middle income or upper income houses, those will be built. The market will take care of that. It's the low income, it's for seniors, it's for students. Those are the really hard ones to build. That's where we're going to be focusing.
And those are the people who are most in danger of becoming
That's
homeless.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
This has been an episode of Where Do We Go From Here? I'm Eric Thome. I've been talking with 1st District Supervisor Heidi Hall.
The moment I felt his humanity, it didn't matter anymore how he looked, the color of his hair, the shape of his body. I felt such compassion and connection, and it was a real lesson for me. And actually, when we got off the bus, he was asking for my help with carrying something. And at that point, I felt really open, and I just came and helped him, and our hands touched, so I could really feel like body to body. And then he went, he didn't even say goodbye, or because he was all into his own world. And I was so grateful that I had this experience where I could see my own fear was imagination.
This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm your host, Lou Sitzer. You're watching Where Do We Go From Here? This is a series of episodes based on the issue of homelessness. We have with us Brendan Phillips, who is Nevada County Housing Resource Manager. And this is a wrap-up for the time being. This is the 9th episode, which can be seen on YouTube. If you go to Where Do We Go From Here, YouTube, NCTV, you can see all 9 episodes if you like and become really well educated as to where we go from here.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do, Brendan, it's been 2 months since we last had you interviewed here, and give us a catch up on what has taken place with you in the job.
Okay. I am now 7 months, 8 months into this position, Housing Resource Manager, and within really over the last few months have been sort of the process of implementing a plan around homelessness, and really that has entailed making sure that all of the partners that need to be in place, service providers, county staff, other stakeholders in the jurisdictions, are all really kind of coming together and coalescing around the plan. So there's a lot of messages, a lot of messaging, a lot of meetings, a lot of making sure that we're all on the same page for the various elements that the plan has in it. So right now we're in the process of formalizing. We work with our service providers through contracts. So our department, our county contracts with service providers.
So when you say service providers, give us an example of what
sure,
that
like
means.
Hospitality House or Freed, the Center for the Disability organization, or Spirit, or any of those organizations.
So these are typically nonprofits, or
typically, yeah. I mean, so typically it's a nonprofit that we're going to contract with for a service provision.
so someone like the hospital or the
Yeah.
courts or the judges, they're not in.
Yeah, so there are different kinds of contracts that we work on. Some of them are contracts that bring revenue in that we then subcontract out, and some of them are we have the revenue and we give it to the organizations.
It's not simple.
So it's not simple. So I've been really learning how that process works within the county, and then we've been identifying service providers that will be taking on elements of the plan, and then working on what we call a schedule of services. How is that going to work? And then what can we hold you accountable for, and what do we need from you, and what do you need from us? And so those contracts have to go before the board, and the board then either consents to them if there's no contention to them, or they'll pull them off of consent and look at them more thoroughly and have some public comment. So we'll be moving forward with those contracts in April and in May. And I think, the elements of the plan sort of start really becoming programs by July. But there's so many moving pieces, and as I said, so much need to ensure that that the county and the service providers and all of the people impacted are on the same page as we move forward, that I have to say, sorry folks, but it's not always going to be the best that we just hit the gate at July and everything's running smoothly. We're going to have to make sure that we've got everything right. It's really important to do it right.
Well, you've got a lot of moving pieces.
A lot of moving pieces, yeah. So I think that's really the update, is just I've been working really hard to sort of bring together all the elements of the plan. And they really are, and just as a recap, three main parts of the plan are that we're working towards forming a navigation center, is what we're calling it, and that's what HUD calls it, and other cities have adopted, and that is a place that people can receive services and be during the day.
Right.
So right now our shelter exit, you exit the shelter in the morning, and a lot of people make their way out into the community. Well, we're trying to co-locate a lot of services and a lot of provisions in one place.
So when you say exit in the morning, you're talking about leaving hospitality house. Of course, there are also homeless that aren't residing in hospitality house, so you're looking at something broader as well.
Yeah, bring people in, do some what they call sort of Maslow's level needs, where you're talking about, just access to a locker, for example, so you can source some things, make sure you don't lose some things, maybe access to getting mail, case management activities, other things that will be going on in the navigation center. So another plank of the plan is to start working from the perspective of housing first. So we've always had sort of our permanent supportive housing programs in the county run through behavioral health with a contract to Turning Point Community Services for the wraparound services that happen in the homes. That's about 30 people that we see in those homes. Those are people that without this resource would be homeless, and not only would be homeless, but would probably be cycling in and out of some pretty severe issues with their mental health. So we have a program that runs at a pretty low barrier. I mean, we try to get everyone ready, but once you have a unit in our permanent supportive housing program, we're going to do everything we can under the sun to keep you in that unit. So it's a very assertive model of working with people. So the plan with Housing First is to essentially extend those opportunities for people who are in that might not be, people come into behavioral health at any given point in their life, and they might be we do it the best we can to assess people, but not all the people that are highly vulnerable on our streets are going to be able to access or qualify for behavioral health. So we're trying to make a program that can look at how vulnerable people are using our coordinated entry system, which is another whole complex issue, but the idea is that there's a list that's created, and the list gives you asks for a bunch of attributes of the person, and it ranks them by how vulnerable they are. So I'm hoping to connect our Housing First program to the most vulnerable people on the list and start offering people units of housing with supportive services. So that's our Housing First approach, and there won't be any requirement to be in those houses, in those units.
So correct me, it sounds like there are 30 or so clients through the Health and Human Services that are being housed now and cared for, and you're looking at enlarging that pool.
Yes, and to include people that might have what you'd consider, the permanent supportive housing is for the program at behavioral health splits between the people who are eligible are a severe and persistent mental illness is on board, so a diagnosed severe and persistent mental illness, and chronic homelessness. So those folks get in. So this Housing First would continue along the chronic homelessness line, but there's so many times and reasons why people cannot be adequately assessed for a persistent mental illness. People do use all sorts of strategies to, I would too. You want to remain as normal and as feeling productive as you can, and as the walls close in on you, it becomes harder and harder to admit, maybe I have a mental health problem. We have so much stigma in our country about it anyway. So really these units might be a precursor for someone who's coming in, that we can get them a little more stabilized, get them starting to work on a service stream of some kind, and then make that assessment. Are we able to, over 6 to 8 weeks of seeing this person steadily improve, come to the conclusion that they have a chronic or a mental health problem? Those are some of the problems that we have, right? Right now our behavioral health system more or less requires you to come to certain places to be evaluated. And if you're chronically homeless and dealing with the life on the street and self-medicating and doing whatever you can to cope, the house becomes the most stabilizing factor, and that's the root of housing first as a philosophy and as a evidence-based practice. Is we get better outcomes when we solve the housing issue first and work with people on all the concurrent issues.
And that was the conclusion I came to in watching all of the past episodes, and that is that housing solves a multitude of problems. Solving is not the wrong word for it, but applies to a multitude. You're not only dealing with the most vulnerable, chronically affected, but you're also dealing with many, many individuals who are just a paycheck away, who are homeless because they lost a job, or there's some internal issues, family issues going on that don't necessarily rise to the level of crucial or critical, but they need housing. So by looking at the various housing options, it's not just for the most vulnerable.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, and that's the crux of the position I've taken on, is to say that currently I would call myself the homeless resource manager in a way, because I've been coalescing a plan around homelessness. Right. But the point you bring up is all too many people in our community are rent burdened. Right. So they're paying well over 30%, sometimes over 50%, sometimes over 70% of their monthly take-home pay just to keep their home. And as rents go up, because supply goes down and the rents can keep going up, those folks are the next folks at on the precipice. I have friends that are in that boat. I talk weekly to people that I love and care for who've lived in this community all their life and are asking, when is the housing resource manager going to make enough houses come into being that the rent that the choke on supply can go down, and that we can stabilize this rental problem. So I think yes, I mean, I will say the planks of the plan to end homelessness are heavily revolving around evidence-based practices for working with people who have a lot of trauma, a lot of substance abuse issues, a lot of mental health issues, all three, and there are sort of the most vulnerable people in our community right now, and many of them have lived here all their lives too. So, So to get to your point, and I'll just say that the last part of our plank on homelessness is the multidisciplinary service coordination. So we're going to start putting people in a room together to start working on the together. And I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, but it's harder than you think.
Oh yeah.
I mean, a lot of people have a lot of organizations have a lot of heart. A lot of our county services have a lot of heart. And yet they all kind of work in their own bubbles, and you kind of don't know where one person's been. And so by bringing us all together on a regular basis to talk about housing opportunities and service opportunities, we can start getting people better queued up.
Well, before you came on board, I sat in the Continuum of Care meetings for almost a year, and it's very frustrating to do exactly what you're saying, is that to bring all these people together and to have them agree. So going back to an interview I had with Alex Gamelgard, Chief Gamelgard of Grass Valley, he was very clear in saying what was needed at the county level is leadership and a plan. And it seems to me they've got the leadership problem solved. You're the guy. You are the point man, and you've got a wealth of experience, tremendous experience that you bring, and a level head, and you've got the energy and you've got the vision. So it's a matter now of how do you bring about a plan that can be, agreed upon. And again, nothing's perfect. A plan that even as it's created and implemented is not going to be perfect, but it's going to be better than what we've got. Yeah.
I mean, so a plan has been presented on January 9th to our Board of Supervisors, and I would call that plan sort of the tip of the spear. Get in the door, outline what you want to do, set some funding requirements to it, and the board overwhelmingly approved. So that's step one. So
that was the creation of your job.
Yes. Well, no, that was the culmination of my first 4 months.
Okay. All right.
Basically coming up with the planks I just described to fund those things so that we can get rolling and become a county that is utilizing the best practices that are constantly being talked about within federal and state funding sources. So when I get a grant in front of me and they're saying, here, you want to apply for this grant, they're so often, what are you doing that's innovative? What are you doing that follows in line with best practices? If we aren't doing any of those things, I'm not going to even apply for the grant. So we have sort of crossed those off the lists. We can get to those grants now and be competitive for them across the state with this plan. But the second part of the plan is that the wheeling and dealing and the behind the scenes, bringing the partners together. Not everyone is going to sit at a table together and agree on all the issues, but if it was a Venn diagram of issues, there are overlaps, and we got to work in those overlap areas, and we can decide what those are going to be. So that plan is going forward, and I finally, over this last week, coalesced a larger vision of the plan, lots of goals, lots of objectives that will go before our board or will be given to our board. And then the final steps coming out of this are, this is going to sound so frustrating for a lot of people because it's just meetings and plans, right? But the idea here is that the vision is we have homeless folks, we have people of all different stripes out on the street, we have people who are about to become homeless, we have a housing crisis in the entire state. There's so many complex parts of this, so many community-based parts of this, so many things that the community needs to be informed of, to know about, to be educated on, to impart wisdom to, all of that. That's a broader community strategic plan. Now that the board has come and the county has come and said, here's what we can do this year or next year for homelessness, we've hired someone to help with this, to coordinate all this. Now that we've got that part out of the way, we have to come back around the table as a larger community and do a large strategic plan for the community. And I am working my hardest to ensure that that large strategic plan is pointed directly towards housing. I mean, that's but again, it's such a complex issue. The housing piece is not where my expertise were, and I'm quickly learning about it. And it's our community characteristic. It's how much nature we have, how much vacant land there is, how many people live here, these are huge questions.
And what the tolerance is.
Yeah.
For the kind of housing we need to take care of the homeless.
Yeah. And the fact that, like, I enjoy going out and eating food, and there's someone who waits at the table. I like taking my kid to the library, and there's a librarian. They're rapidly getting priced out.
Right.
So what about the person that begs the groceries at your grocery store? What about the person, I mean, if we all want housing for everyone, and we have lots of retirees coming here and more well-heeled folks building homes and stuff like that, well, they also need people to live in the community to support their activities. So it's got to be this broad-based plan. And so, we have to look at extremely low income, and we got to go up to that moderate income. And it tends to be that the higher price stuff kind of builds itself because it can pencil out in the end. But that has to be a part of the plan too.
Yeah, there are a couple things I have in mind pushing a plan, and one is what I've seen the library do over the last 10, 15 years. They originally passed a measure that was 1/4 cent sales tax, lasted for 10 years. It just phased out, and they renewed it with Measure A. They increased it from 1/8 cent to 1/4 cent. And that generates between $2 and $4 million a year for whatever the needs of the library are. And they've expanded considerably. The library performs a great service. When you compare that to the community needs for homeless, I think the homeless have quite a bit of importance and weight when you look upon how the issue taxes the hospitals and the courts and the prisons and the nonprofits and the fire department, police department. It just goes on and on. If we could have a consistent financial base upon which to build a plan or at least implement a plan that has been built that would provide a lot of security for people who live here, and a lot of reassurance that we are taking care of our own.
Yeah.
Which is, as a community, we've shown we can do.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, and you know, the fear always is that once you step into this arena of ramping up these services, that it'll just attract people to come from all over the state to come here. It's, if that's the case, I mean, you know, LA just is spending $4 billion building housing, programs after programs. I mean, they've rapidly expanded the amount of money they have that they are having a problem getting it out the door. I mean, they have so much money available, but they don't have. They don't have the infrastructure. Well, that gets the point of they
right.
need. Like, I heard a report that said they need 400 masters in social work people to be working with their new supportive clients in the housing they built, right? But they can't pay the people who are the master's degrees enough to live in LA because there's not enough housing. Right. You know, I mean, it's sort of a snake eating its own
22.
tail. So it's really tough. But you know, ultimately, your notion that a permanent supported tax of some kind, or I mean a tax that would permanently fund something like this. You know, it's again, I think, more power to you. We can use everything we can get.
Well, it's more power to us.
Yeah, exactly. We can use everything we can get,
Yeah.
but I also know that it needs to be in service of housing.
Sure.
It has to be, because we don't. Unless we get the housing under control, we're not going to get the good, brightest people to be here to work on the issue because they can't afford to live here. I just recently, we've had a couple of people try to come and take positions within our county, very smart, bright people. It came down to the wire of them even be able to accept the position as they looked for housing and weren't able to find any. So, I mean, again, it's a reoccurring issue. We have a hard time doing recruitments up here in the county side, and a lot of nonprofits too, I know Hospitality House struggles with this all the time, paying their workers enough to not be the future shelter stayers of Nevada County. So they're struggling through that process. So what I would say though is housing is the solution to homelessness.
Right.
It's the main preventative measure that we can take is to develop housing, and we have I think for many, maybe I don't know how many years, I'm not a historian on housing policy, but at least for 50 to 60 years, really started shifting away from any sort of, public investment in housing into fully developing just partnerships with private companies, developers. And the model is we zone, and then we try to make the zoning look good, and we have a housing element, and the state requires X, Y, and Z for that housing element, and this is how it's done across the state, and then you kind of just wait for the developers to come to you, is how it feels like, and then there's a whole wrangling process where the developer tries to squeeze as much incentive out of the project. We used to have an inclusionary zoning policy, meaning we had to have a certain number of low-income units. We don't have it anymore, and that's because developers are saying, well, if you're going to make us do that, we're not going to build here.
Right.
So we got rid of it. So I guess the feeling I get the more and more I go into my planning department, wonderful people at the planning department, and work on, my new strategy has been, I walk into the planning department, I've got a little 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and I have drawn a map of the parcel of property that I like, and I'm like, okay, this is my plan. I'm taking off my badge. I'm a developer. I want to develop 25, 500 square foot homes. I'll have a road here. I'm going to do this. Oh, there's this creek here, and we're looking at the map and all that. And I just ask them, what do I need to do to make this happen? Because I don't come from a planning background.
Yeah.
But I like to have those conversations, because I hear all this stuff. Well, you're going to have to do the CEQA, and you're going to have to do this, and you're going to have to mitigate something around that stream, and you're going to all of that. The more and more I've gone through that process, the more I've realized that the paradigm is broken.
Right.
In this whole model. I mean,
right.
We don't have a way of developing enough housing for the growing population. You could have no one move to the state of California, and we still grow as a population. I mean, hopefully, right? Yeah. So we don't have enough housing. We need to build housing, and somehow, in some way, the process by which that is done is broken. So, do we I guess where I'm at right now is, do we try to fix the broken process, or we come up with a new and more innovative paradigm for how this could work? And we did a whole rezoning, element rezone, where they did 7 new sites and they rezoned them to maximum density, like you were saying. And I think we need to package those things up in really true terms and go shopping.
Yeah.
For someone to take those projects on, because we need people to come in here, and maybe they don't know about them. Maybe they don't know enough about them. Maybe there's not, maybe when we go and do that, we'll hear back from the developer, what's it gonna take to make this happen? Well, I need X, Y, and Z more. And then we can kind of learn about what that process is. I think there's a lot of smart people in planning. I think we can work together.
Yeah, well, one of the points of view I've come to is that crisis drives change, and unfortunately, that's how this program originated. Where do we go from here? Because we're stuck. The paradigm doesn't seem to be working. How do we change it or develop a new one? And it's going to take some flexibility by the cities, by the county, by people in departments, by the community to accept a level of housing that they may be uncomfortable with. But in fact, the consequences of ignoring the problem are much worse. You're looking at huge fire issues, hygiene, health issues, court issues. So rather than be doing crisis management, let's step back and do some planning and avoid the crisis.
And let's make sure that everyone knows at the table that it's not about ricky-ticky little houses all lined up in a row. We can do this in a way that befits what our community wants, as long as we're willing to accept the fact that if we can get past the we need housing, we don't need housing debate, and just say we need housing.
Right.
Let's start from there. And then the next iteration of that is, how do we get the housing in a way that looks like our community and feels like what we can handle and do? And then I think it's sort of a challenge to the community. There's also a bunch of projects that can be built around a housing. Housing doesn't need to be just housing. I mean, we've got infrastructure that we can put in place, using funds the state has and the federal government has. I mean, it's not like we just have to say, here's the spot for 22 or 25 or 30 low income units, and they're all gonna be together, and that's our new low income part of town. There's ways to till that soil. There's ways to say, use innovation to bring paths through, to be orientated around how there's a uplift for the broader community when they accept this when we all go forward in this plan. I mean, I think the main issues that people always come to with development is obviously traffic and, parking and, all those things are issues, right? So, I mean, we can do sensible development that also makes traffic smoother, or makes, there's other ways to look at it. We don't have to it's not all mutually exclusive. If you put more people here, then everything's going to go to S. So.
Well, it's a puzzle. We don't have the complete picture of the puzzle, so we're assembling it as we are moving.
Yeah.
This is the wrap-up of the show on the homeless issue, but we will be returning to it, I guarantee, because it's not going to go away anytime soon. We need to continue to focus as a community. My belief is that we can handle it, that we have the resources, we have the talent, and we even have the funding if we decide to do it ourselves.
I think so. And just remember, I always tell people, it's bread and roses. It's bread and roses, meaning we all need the things to live: house, shelter, food, clothing. It's also roses. It's also, we need the things in life that are beautiful, that are nice to be around, the communities that we live in, the trips to the theater, or that sort of stuff. So when we think about poverty and stuff like that, let's not forget that people who live below the median income, who are living in poverty, they need nice things too. Right. And so we have to think about it all together.
Well, thanks, Brendan. Good luck. Good luck to you, good luck to us, and hopefully continue to watch the programs. I hope you find them useful, educational, and again, you can find them posted on YouTube, Where Do We Go From Here, NCTV. You can watch them streamed Monday night, 7 p.m. on Comcast Channel 17, And you can also support these programs by going to nevadacountytv.org and donating. So thanks a lot for watching, and tune in again.